jam. Hey everyone, me again. So I don't like making these negative videos. I'd much rather, say I bought this thing, tried it out. I think it's awesome, highly recommend it, go for it, etc., buy with confidence, all that good stuff. Unfortunately, the level of quality I've seen with this James River Armory Gallant or Gallant, however they want it said, it doesn't rise to nearly that level. If anything, it's really quite the opposite. So initially, right off the bat, the gun seemed fine. Safety worked. All the little function checks. The handguard wobbled a little bit, but the manual says this is fairly normal. There's actually online instructions out there about how to shim it if you really wanted to. I wouldn't have bothered if that was all there was wrong with it. It's not function inhibiting, so whatever. Not the end of the world. Where we do start to run into problems, just to get to the point, is the way in which this gun differs from an original AK, which is why I have one out here. So on the top we see that on an original AK, the sight, of course, is out in front of the receiver behind the barrel on this rear sight block, and on the Galil they moved it to the back of the receiver cover. So this gives you a longer sight radius, and in theory that's an improvement. Where one thing they needed to do to accommodate this is to make sure that the top cover fits a lot more securely than it does on a standard AK, because now your sight is there and you want it to hold zero. On a standard AK, it just covers the action, so it doesn't have to be obscenely tight. And this is where we see our first problem, because the top cover on this actually wobbles quite a lot. Let me demonstrate here. I mean, note, for instance, this gap between the safety and the edge of the top cover here. It basically rattles almost, and then, same view from the top. I don't know how well that shows up from the top, but quite a bit there. So there's probably about 1 millimeter of play at the level of the actual aperture. So that's not going to hold zero. The other thing we can kind of see here is that the top cover is bent. Note the gap where it actually meets the receiver. So it clearly, let me see if I can get it to focus, actually right there. So you can see it bows outward here. It's bent, it's fairly, like I can't get my nail underneath it, right? And this is probably how it should be across the entire thing. Here, obviously I can. Then it goes inward a little bit and then out again. So that's probably why it's loose. There's also this nick here, and then there's a dent in it as well. I don't know how well that's going to show up, but there's actually a pretty palpable dent in there. So that's probably why it's as loose as it is. Just for comparison's sake, on the standard AK, now granted, this is an Arsenal SGL-21, so it's probably, because it's Russian made or whatnot, by reputation, it's probably a little nicer than the average AK, but there's actually no play whatsoever. Like here, let me show you the same angle. Like, it doesn't move. Not front to back, not side to side, and it doesn't even need to be that secure, and yet it is. So we have a serious problem here, because, again, AK doesn't, somehow this Galil does. So that's our first one. But noticing in the manual, it does say that the warranty work does not actually cover shipping. So I figured, okay, well, is it going to be worth the $40 or whatever to send it back, or could I just bend it back into shape, or, worst case scenario, find a replacement? Although replacements for them are not actually that cheap and available, especially if you want one that actually has sights on it. So, but okay, whatever, maybe the gun at least runs. And it turns out that it doesn't do that either. The gun actually, as you probably saw in that little intro bit, does jam. Specifically, it fails to eject more often than not. Sometimes it would stovepipe where the casing was actually sticking out of the action. Sometimes it wouldn't, even the casing was in the action, as it was, basically almost like it threw it in the wrong direction, and it would try to feed the next round and the empty casing would still be in there too. In one instance, it actually, spent casing went behind the bolt, so I had to open the top cover to get it out. So the gun doesn't seem to run either, and this was with the Winchester branded M855, which is one of the recommended loadings in the manual. The manual does say don't use any steel case 223, which I didn't. I know we've all heard the rule about if it can't handle the steel, it doesn't deserve the brass, but this can't even handle the brass. So that's another kind of major problem with this gun. I mean, if I had known this gun was going to be like this, I would never have made this purchase. I did leave a message with James River Armory to see what, if anything, they would do about it. I haven't heard back yet. I will do an update video with what, if anything, they can do. Maybe it's going to be a matter of, you know, throwing parts at it. The other thing I noticed about this gun that I thought was kind of odd was they actually added a buffer to the recoil spring, which is, and I don't think that's true to the original Galil. I don't think so. AKs don't have buffers, and in fact, most people kind of knock the buffers for AKs. They point out if it needed one, it would have been designed that way. And I have heard reports that those, they do adversely affect accuracy, but this one came from the factory this way, so I figured they must know what they're doing, but maybe that's one of the things that I will end up trying. But long story short is that these guns do have problems, and I'm not the only one for whom that's been the case. I've seen quite a few reviews where they just don't run very well or exhibit other problems. So I would say, you know, for the time being, unless there's some kind of a Gen 3, because I think this is already a Gen 2, I personally wouldn't, at least for now. Thank you for watching, of course, as always.